Okay. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Can AI Give Superpowers to Finance Teams? Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hadar Siderman-Norris, a partner at Team8, and I'll be moderating today's session. Today, we'll explore how AI is opening up new opportunities for finance teams, particularly in treasury management. We'll discuss practical use cases, potential pitfalls, and what the future holds for AI in finance. Before we kick things off, a few housekeeping rules. The webinar is a panel with our experienced speakers. We have some interesting questions set up, and you'll also be able to ask questions in the end. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom, and if we don't have enough time to answer your questions, we'll be sure to get in touch and answer separately. So please add your email to the question so we can get back to you. The webinar is recorded, and we'll send out the recording afterwards. And to keep up to date with our traditional activities and content, you're welcome to follow Panax on LinkedIn as well as on our website, thepanax.com. Let me introduce our esteemed speakers. Danielle Fletcher, CFO of Planful. Danielle has extensive experience as a financial leader, both in tech companies and VCs. Noam Mills, co-founder and CEO of Panax. Noam has a strong background in finance as a former VP Finance and finance leader. Sefi Itzkovich, co-founder and CTO of Panax. Sefi brings deep technical expertise, including in AI and machine learning. Great, so before we kick in, Dan, if you can give us a little bit of an intro of the company that you're coming from and what space you're operating in.
Certainly. So I'm Dan Fletcher, excited to be here today. I'm the CFO of Planful, which is a market-leading financial performance platform. And what that means is all things budgeting, forecasting, planning, including month-end close and reporting, both financial and operational. We're a platform that does all of that. I'm excited to be here because Planful is certainly keenly aware that our customers are asking for AI capabilities in our platform. And following this trend has been extremely exciting and I think is going to be a game changer.
Thank you, Dan. Now moving on to the Panax team. So we have Sefi and Noam. Noam, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Panax.
Sure. I'm Noam, I'm the CEO of Panax. We're a cash flow and treasury management platform for mid-size and large businesses. So essentially we come in to help finance teams in companies where the whole treasury and cash flow operations start becoming more complex, usually around the time of international growth, more inflows and outflows, working capital concerns. So we connect to all relevant data sources to help the team, first of all, get visibility and control over the different cash movements, as well as make more optimal decisions around liquidity management. And I'm super excited because I think AI can help in everything I mentioned so far. Anything from, and we'll cover it more deeply in the webinar, but basically anything from understanding transactions to surfacing insights to making more optimal decisions around liquidity. And we've been researching and leveraging AI in many different areas in our product for that purpose.
Thank you, Noam. Yeah, sounds like the perfect background for the discussion that we're about to have. So thank you both. Now, let's start with a quick warm-up. Could you please share what excites you most about the current application of AI that is not finance related necessarily?
Sure. So I'll start. I think one of the things that excites me the most is everything that's related to content creation. I believe there's a lot of creativity in all of us, but limitations like drawing, grammar, etc., hold us back. The new wave of Gen AI and LLMs specifically removes a lot of barriers, much like the internet did for access of knowledge. Gen AI does for soft skills. So I think this is a great opportunity for all of us, especially the content creators, to bring much more value and really extend the work we're doing.
I can go next. I think I'm really excited about the use of AI for language translation and language learning. People talk about the risks of AI when it comes to hurting communication between people, and this is actually one area where AI is significantly reducing communication barriers and actually helping people better understand and communicate with each other. So I'm super excited about that.
And I'll conclude our little three-hitter here. I'm most excited about Gen AI for all things learning, both for myself, and not a day goes by where I'm not tapping questions into one of the model interfaces and learning, whether it's a medical question, a cooking question, or research for work or personal passions. And I can see that as we harden these products and put the right guardrails in place, having a tremendous impact on education for children as well. So lots of risks, but I think huge potential to help educate everybody from adults and children and all around.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a very exciting time we're living in, and seems like the opportunities for discovering even more ways that AI can create value for our lives on a private and a business side is very exciting. Now, moving on, let's dive into our discussion. Sefi, could you start by giving us a brief overview of how AI has evolved over the last few years and what has changed?
Sure, of course. So I think like basically a few years ago, you had to have like very deep knowledge. We started with ML and AI, which is usually was done like using feature engineering and a lot of manual selection of feature, and you really had to know your domain. It evolved to a more sophisticated type of learning, which was the deep learning phase, where you had like the ability to basically to learn the features by itself, and that simplified a lot of the work done by the engineers. But like the side effect was you had to have much more data, and you had to use actually a much more complex technology. So I think even in that sense, the barrier was even bigger. I think one of the things that is really exciting about like the Gen AI and the LLMs, it brings a much more, I would say, a much more general type of learning. It is utilizing the deep learning, but it will allow you to basically solve like a more generic task and not specific task. And I think this type of technology will really open up a lot of different use cases, which will basically, I'm not sure commoditize is the word I would use, but will make it much more available to a lot of very interesting use cases, of course, including fintech.
You know, in the investment world, we call it democratizing of knowledge or learning or whatever. But I agree with you. I think this is a very interesting angle to it. Now, Noam, you've been around the industry quite a while, and you've came up with a few innovative uses of AI in cash flow management. Can you share some top uses or use cases where AI is making a significant impact today? And also maybe touch on some scenarios where AI might not be the right fit or the best fit.
Yeah. So I think the most sought after use of AI is for forecasting, for insights, for identifying trends, which is really super exciting and is something that many companies are working on. But I think before developing these features, it's really important to first understand what is needed to even implement AI, and that's some of the pitfalls exist there. So Sefi spoke about the need for a lot of data to train models and to get that. So I think the very basic layer, even before discussing specific uses for AI, is to connect to many sources of various data sets and through APIs or other means. So getting as much data in a way that models can then train on and really add value beyond human ability is something that we're putting a lot of emphasis on at Panax. So integrating to as many data sources that have value. So it can be banking data, it can be different fintech platforms. It's also ERP software and other platforms like FP&A, for example. Planful is on the roadmap as well in that sense. So that's kind of the first step. Then I think it's super important to also understand that the model is only as good as the data you feed it. So there is a major pitfall when it comes to garbage in, garbage out. If the data is not really structured in a way that the model can learn from, and oftentimes the data is also contextual to the company. So really making sense of the data. And that's finally is also something that AI can help with, right? So understanding what are the specific transactions, categorizing, tagging is something that is much more basic in the sense that it's not the model that will predict the future, but it's something that's super powerful that actually without it's impossible to create meaningful insights on the future. So that's another thing where Panax is really doing a lot in automatically identifying intercompany transactions, for example, or learning from user input around data categorization and enhancing it and reducing the time it takes to work on that. So that's kind of the second area. And the third area, I think it's the most sexy in that sense of getting a more accurate forecast, surfacing trends and proactive alerts. And that's kind of the top layer that we're also developing and working on. But I think that those are kind of the three steps that we're looking at developing and implementing AI for cash flow and treasury management.
Cool. Yeah, I think that breakdown really makes sense and kind of helps to understand where it does fit in. Now, Dan, moving to you from your perspective at Planful, what are some of the practical tips for finance teams looking to integrate AI into their operations? Are there any common pitfalls they should be aware of?
We're at such an interesting moment in the Gen AI cycle here because 4 years ago, we had AI. There were plenty of companies that were talking about AI, but it wasn't LLMs and it wasn't neural networks, right? It was much more specific use cases. And so to a certain extent, finance professionals are aware of this, at least technology focused finance professionals, but the game has definitely changed. And I think we spent the last 2 years meeting together, seeking knowledge, and realizing this is real. This is not blockchain or Web3. This is a use case in generative AI and specifically LLMs in Gen AI that is here to stay and will find a home and create a tremendous amount of value. That said, where we stand today with the technology, and this is from speaking to finance professionals at many different events recently, it's not quite real yet. And so my answer to this question is sort of, let's wait, we're learning, but there are things we can use today. So I think the most interesting conversations right now are, hey, what can practical use scenarios, what practical use scenarios can materialize for you today, Mrs. VP of Finance or Mr. Controller? And I would say there's sort of 4 buckets. The first one is almost theoretical for most companies. It's if you have a large team or even just a team of Gen AI devs who is available for internal work, you could build custom applications and custom workflows. And I think quite a bit of the Fortune 500 have folks running around doing this based on my conversation, but that's not accessible to everybody. And so I shift then to the next paradigm, which I think is much nearer term, which is this concept we've been discussing on this webinar. Existing vendors or new Gen AI vendors like Panax, existing vendors like Planful, introducing AI capabilities in Gen AI capabilities into their platform to enhance it. And this is happening around us. It's not late stage, it's early stage, but there's almost no vendor worth their salt in finance right now that doesn't have an AI element on their roadmap, and that's because customers want it. They're asking for it. So I think the prudent vendors there are focusing on elements that will really add value to their customers. They're listening to their customers, which is what we're doing at Planful. Then the last 2 are really here. I mean, you can do this now. So one would be just any generative exercise that a finance professional might engage in. So creating or updating a T&E policy, for example, or benchmarking salaries, these types of things. You can do that today, but there's a lot of risk around that garbage in, garbage out. Do not introduce company data, for example, into a public LLM. But any kind of creative process, even writing a blog, like Sefi said, finance professionals can leverage these models today. And then the final one is the one I'm most excited about today, which is any type of manual labor in the business, any workflow that includes manual labor, specifically like document processing, anything dealing with large amounts of unstructured data, like Noam said, multiple sources. We have the ability now to automate away some of that processing work. I have a friend who's a founder of a document processing AI company. He calls it automating the workaround systems. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's a meaty topic.
Absolutely.
I think
Thank you for that.
I want to add something
Sure.
on top of what Dan said. So we talked about the mistrust and kind of skepticism around finance team. I think one major element there is, AI is often seen as a black box. You throw some data in and then it gives you some output. And I think the explainability and having AI work with and finance people are some of the most skeptic around and rightfully so. So doing things that using AI to surface recommendations to enhance and kind of be a co-pilot to help finance teams as opposed to and we might get there right as the technology matures and in later times, but really enhance the explainability and help finance team also explain to their teams, to the broader management and really use it to make decisions based off of and not just as a black box that spits out some output is something that's super critical.
I agree. I think that this extends beyond finance team to the finance world as a whole, demystifying, right, the results that you get from using this technology is going to be critical. But I agree with you 100%. Looking ahead, what do you see as the future of AI in finance? What trends should be watching, and how do you envision AI evolving in the next few years? Sefi, if you could comment on it.
Yeah, of course. So I think from our perspective, we see basically, I think it will be like multiple techniques that will be deployed in the next few years. I think what you call traditional ML or AI, I think it's here to stay, at least for the short to mid-term, because there are a lot of things when you talk about how you even evaluate your model, right? When you talk about LLMs or GenAI, it's really hard to get accuracy. When you talk about really specific tasks like we're doing in Panax, you would want to apply, at least today, the more like traditional deep learning neural networks and so on, because you want to do really specific tasks like matching and so on. So I think we will probably see it in the short to mid-term as well. I think one of the things that's very exciting, and we are of course looking at is trying to build your own LLM and custom LLMs and domain specific, which basically means we will be able to train the data per like on our specific data, without like the risk and all the exposure of data to the external OpenAI or Google LLMs. And I think finally we will see and of course using the public LLMs like OpenAI and ChatGPT for the more generic tasks, right? So I think we will see like the combination. I don't think there will be a clear winner, and at least the way we are thinking about it, it's a combination of these three techniques that are going to push our product and the entire industry forward by leveraging all the three, like for the right task. Each task will have its own technique. I don't think there will be a clear winner, or at least I don't think so.
Thank you, Sefi. Dan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Sefi said it really well. That was a nuanced and very practical response. I think to dream a little bit, I do believe that the long term here, if we're talking in the shape of a decade rather than in a 1 or 2 year bucket, that I think anybody who nerds out on Gen AI can see the potential. So Noam mentioned forecasting, and certainly a lot of this is what we're working on today at Planful, but some of the highest cognition and thorniest and most strategic workflows in finance involve solving complex problems to produce projections. So gathering a lot of different data and then building the structure to forecast something, whether it's cash flow or the P&L or any operational data, even customer inquiries, for example. And so I do think that those use cases are on the table. And I think, like Sefi said, it's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of what LLM you're using and what data is going in. And and how you're validating, to Noam's point, the responses. But I think that's where we're headed. And what excites me most about that is that finance professionals, I mean, this is like the tale as old as time, spend way too much time wrangling data and not enough time adding value to their business by using their brains, right? And so surfacing insights and what if analysis, and then making recommendations to business users. And so I think that is the most exciting potential outcome of all this Gen AI potential, to be clear, is actually freeing humans up a little bit to use our brains.
Yeah, absolutely. To leverage their ability to actually be insightful and look for areas where they could really move the needle beyond just the data element. So absolutely. Thank you for all of these insights. Let's now move on to the Q&A segment. We've received some questions from our audience, and I'll read them to you, and we can see who answers them. So the first one, what are the main challenges finance teams face when integrating AI into their processes?
I can start with this one. So I think the first thing is something that I touched on earlier, is the data that is required to feed into to really get a meaningful insight from that. So really connecting different data sources, making sense out of these data sources in a way that can be beneficial is one thing. And the second thing that I think we haven't touched on yet is actually that, AI models, at the end of the day, they're really great at learning from the past and integrating a lot of data that's relevant and significant, and trying to, whether it's guess the next word of a blog post or create a cash flow forecast. But at the end of the day, the future doesn't always behave like the past, and specifically for finance teams, and when whether it's changes that the team wants to implement or things that just change in the world. So over reliance on just AI is something that is a challenge when integrating AI, and that's one of the reasons why I think AI will forever be an enhancer and something that helps finance teams. But at the end of the day, I think Dan talked about it, can take away all the technical work and free up the team. But that input of where does the company want to go, what are the things that are about to change, that human input eventually is something that is something that companies really need to be aware of when they integrate AI into their processes.
Absolutely. Sefi, maybe this one could be to you. How do you ensure the data presented by AI models is reliable and free from bias?
So I think one of the most important thing is to make sure the data is balanced and not like, this is part of the thing of the data curation and making sure the data is well balanced and diverse enough. I think the other part is basically guardrails. Even though we are leveraging models, we don't just output to the users whatever the models is returning. Basically, we have some kind of guardrails and other kind of mechanism to control what we're presenting to the user. And I think this is part of the responsibility of the platform, right, of the application.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add something there. I think the question was, what's the biggest challenge that finance professionals face integrating AI into their current, I think, ecosystem? And I do believe that the biggest challenge today is know-how and time. And so, look, G&A is often less than 10% of revenue. Finance teams are not bursting with capacity. And so carving up the time to do all the learning required, which is hopefully what folks are doing on this webinar when they attend it, but then carving out the time to go make it real, something that's early in its maturity curve, is a real barrier. Like I said, if you have a team internally going around knocking up these use cases, you're a lucky and fortunate person, but most businesses do not have that.
That's true. So another question that kind of feeds into this is, what finance roles do you think AI will replace eventually?
In terms of replace, I think you have to think about repetitive sort of I don't want to say low level, but document processing, data wrangling workflows that truly no financial professionals want to be doing anyway. They didn't go to school to download a bunch of data and marry it, and so I think those are the jobs, the roles that will be replaced. So things in order processing, things in workflows like the PO and expense approvals. I do think AI will get there, and in some cases is already there, and will make those non-human work streams. Now, I'm not a big believer that will replace jobs wholesale, because there are very few people who are doing just,
Right.
but some jobs do. And so I think those jobs will likely be either repurposed or will be eliminated. But the vast majority of finance and accounting jobs involve cognitive, high cognition work. And I think those jobs will simply shift to be more interesting and higher value additive.
Yeah, it's back to your other point, right, about freeing up time and being able to focus where your time really matters and where there's strategic thinking to be applied versus the more technical side of work that can potentially be replaced. So I agree. How can AI help in improving the accuracy of financial forecasts? Maybe Noam, you can take this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think in a couple of ways. First of all, we talked about the explainability. So having an AI model, look at the forecast versus actuals and surface the big gaps. Some of it is to Dan's point, it often starts with a lot of technical work of comparing and contrasting and taking that out of the equation and just bringing up the gaps and the things that need the team's attention. So that's where it starts, but I think it can go even farther as to integrating more data sources and doing things that the team before AI having to optimize the equation they use in Excel to forecast is a very limited leverage that they have on how to create forecasts, whereas AI can really bring in a lot of other various data sources that can really and also understand what are the data sources that are relevant for accurately forecasting, right. Whether it's and again to Dan's point, it can be cash flow, it can be AR, and it can be P&L and any other application. So I think that's where it can dramatically improve forecasting.
Great. Let's see, we have a couple more. How do AI-powered solutions improve transaction categorization and cash flow analytics?
Sefi, you want to take this
one?
Yeah,
I can take this one. So I think one of the things that's usually done today is the manual categorization of transaction. And I think like the obvious boost that the AI does is basically the optimization and the automation of the categorization, which is basically applying, again, an AI model that will learn the categorization. I think the more like the more important thing is that we can also learn by categorization by looking at other examples. So you not necessarily need to build new AI models, but you can always leverage the current categorization and learn, basically inference a lot of insights from what already categorized. So I think this is one of the things that AI will do to help cash flow and categorization.
And something specific about analytics, I think it's really interesting because having all the data and looking at it and thinking about the questions and trying to analyze whatever you want is something that finance people have been doing for ages. But I think where AI can really create a difference is also to proactively surface what are the interesting analysis or what are the trends and insights that are relevant. So I think that's another burden that it can kind of take off of the shoulders of the finance team, is not just help with categorizing or answer any questions you may have, but also help the team understand what are the important things that need their attention now and what are the insights that they then need to further analyze and make decision based off of.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is really interesting. It gives them, it kind of broadens their ability to look at the data in a way that either validates some potential concerns that they may have or certain, ability to dive deeper into areas that you wouldn't necessarily have the flag in place to be able to look at them in the same way. Another question here, I guess, that kind of relates to this is, how does AI handle unexpected financial anomalies or black swan events?
So I can take this one. I think, like, at least from our perspective, one of the things that usually can be done is scenarioing, right? You can basically allow the model a few different views of the world and like giving in different assumption and then basically scenario and try to understand and predict what will happen. I think a lot of the things that we're doing in the financial world is basically forecasting according to different scenarios. And this is part of the thing that we are doing as well here to make sure, again, you can't really plan for every black swan. That's why it's a black swan, but you can try and let the machine try to predict some anomalies. And I think that this is, again, another way of really like the devil advocate to understand, like trying to understand what happened if.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because I think finance folks have a lot of experience and could theoretically be doing all of that, but it's so time consuming and usually they're spread so thin that it's not about their inability to do it. It's just because of prioritization of there's always other very highly prioritized areas to focus on. And this kind of extends their ability to focus on that as well. So I think that's really interesting. Thank you, Sefi. So last questions, what are some of the risks associated with relying on AI for treasury management?
Yeah, so
I can, go ahead, Noam.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I think we've mentioned multiple times on this webinar, the risk that models are only as good as the data available to them. And, Sefi just answered a question about models understanding unique events or perhaps not understanding them. And you can bring that all the way down into the data and think about things like interest rates and unique needs of the business where you entered an FX transaction just because you had a special project going on. And what you don't want is the model to take all that, bake it into the cake and think it's normal or pick out answers that weave those assumptions into the future if they're not going to be repeatable, if they're truly one time. So I think the biggest risk, just very simply put, is that the model isn't aware of context in the way that a human is. And therefore could produce responses and guidance that are suboptimal to the business rather than the opposite.
Sure. Noam, anything to add here?
No, I totally agree. I think human discretion should never be out of the equation when it comes to using AI. So in that sense, that's a risk. Over reliance on models that don't necessarily optimize whatever the company wants to optimize is something that finance professionals need to be aware of and act on.
I would just
yeah, go ahead, Sefi.
Oh, sorry, I would just add one thing. Usually you always talk about common sense, right? And one thing that we take for granted is we humans have common sense and models do not. And I think this is something that, again, at least for now, it's very crucial.
I think it's really interesting. It's this was the last question, so we're gonna finish it here. But it's kind of also finishing with a kind of a sense of optimism, right? Because AI is not really going to be replacing the finance teams. It's just going to make them much more sophisticated and much more capable to do their work in a way that's much more strategic and allow for that common sense and for those human abilities to come into play in a much more significant way. So very nice. Thank you, everyone. It was a really interesting discussion. I hope that the listeners also thought so. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the thoughtful answers and the insights. And we will see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I almost left the meeting.